Hey, Piro, thanks for the reply. First, I guess I'll start with, the computerized barter system you mentioned. I mean, it sounds like a really interesting idea. The shortcoming I see with it is that it works well with goods, but usually what people have to exchange is not goods, but their labor. And I don't necessarily think it works so well with people who, want to, who like, want to work for the means to purchase goods rather than who have a good and want to exchange it for something else. Um, but I think not good enough as a replacement for currency, but I think it's a good complement to currency, and I think that's an important thing because one of the problems with money is that we expect it to do so many functions which are often contradictory to each other. So I think the more we can, spread the burden of money out among different systems, that would actually, be helpful in creating a better economy. And yeah, that's one thing that was brought up by Silvio Gesell, who I mentioned in the previous video. I think I'll put some links in the low bar to some of the stuff I'm talking about. Um, one thing he said is that uh, money as a means of exchange is contradictory to money as a means of savings. And that's another thing he brought up is savings. That he's saying that I mean he was writing at a time when we still had the gold standard, and of course the arguments that were put forward in favor of the gold standard then are the same ones that the gold bugs are putting forward now about how gold appreciates in value, how it's scarce, how it's yeah it holds on to values that so much. And he's pointing out, no, that's actually what you don't want in a means of exchange. It's a good means of savings, but not a good means of exchange. And so we have to separate the functions of exchange and savings in order to have a system that works. Um, in a system of demurrage, I would actually tell people, well, yeah, invest in gold. That's invest in or better yet, invest in companies that look promising, and let the value of your investment increase with the value that they contribute to society. So, um, I was thinking, I was giving a little bit more thought to the whole demurrage idea, um, and when I talk about Gesell, his he was talking about demurrage in the money itself, in terms of the banknotes. And I was saying, most people don't spend money in the form of cash that much anyway. So, my main focus on demurrage is demurrage on money that's in the bank. So, my sort of agenda with the sort of banking demurrage is actually to get rid of interest, because if you give money a negative interest rate, then banks can then lend out at zero interest and still make a profit. Um, so, I mentioned taxing the banks on idle money. I'm not sure that works. And here's where I think your expertise could come in handy, because I mean I may have studied monetary policy a little more than you have, but you know more than me about computers and what computers are capable of. So I'm just curious if you could think of ways that we could sort of computerize the system to increase the velocity of money, so that banks have you know so that banks have incentives to lend at zero interest to people. And then and then with higher velocity of money, we would actually have we wouldn't need to have as much money in the system, because if money is exchanging hands more regularly, then you don't need as much of it. And I think we also need to move to a system where more of the loans are like in the form of small business loans, and less are going to mortgages and speculative activities, and none of it going to the whole shadow banking sector, so to speak. Um, and there's various different things that that I think we should do with that. One interesting proposal that I heard about reforming Wall Street and speculation is this idea called Jubilee shares, which brought up by a economist named Steve Keen. What he suggests is that shares in a company that are sold directly by the company, can last in perpetuity like they do now. But shares that are then resold from a secondary buyer, those expire after 50 years. So, and I guess what that does is it prevents the kind of leveraging that often goes on in the sort of Wall Street speculative markets. And so I don't know if that'd be sufficient, but I would put that on top of the sort of capital gains tax reform that I mentioned in the previous video. And another thing, you mentioned in a reply to someone else about how the taxes are spent, and I talked in my previous video about rent and and taxing all the unearned income, all the income that's earned or that's received from owning a thing like owning land, or also from exploiting nature and not paying the full cost. So after levying those taxes, how are we going to spend it? Obviously, one thing we want to spend it on is infrastructure. Like the electric grid and roads and water systems, and also education and healthcare as well. But another thing we could do, and you mentioned savings, I think we could have a kind of a public savings system with this, so that people don't have to create their own safety net as much. What I would propose is what's called a citizen's dividend, which you invest in a company. Sometimes they'll pay a dividend for which is percentage of a stock of the value of your stock every year. So you get the regular payments in cash. So if we think of rent as a kind of the sort of taxing rent as a kind of society investing in itself, then you give an equal dividend of that investment to every citizen, and then you give people a nice cushion for their own expenses, and means people don't have to work themselves to death. Because if you realize that rent is basically a free lunch, there's a saying, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. Well, there is such a thing as a free lunch in our economy. It's called rent, and right now it's taken privately. But if we as a public collected the rent and then shared that free lunch with everyone, then we have a society that where the burden of labor is spread out, but so are the benefits of society are spread out among everyone, and everyone gets a share of that rent. Just take so if we base our tax system on rental income, just tax all the unearned income in our society, and then you take about like 1 or 2% of that tax revenue, and then give it out in equal payments to every citizen. I think that, I don't know if that would be enough to live on per se, but I don't think you'd have to. It would give people more money to spend. It would give you a little cushion room, so that if you got laid off, it would support you for a little while. And in a sense, it would also, although I think in a system like that, you wouldn't necessarily need a welfare state anymore. It would substitute for a lot of welfare services we have now. You talk about savings as a safety net, and when we talk about a social safety net, usually we're talking about welfare. But if we have a citizen's dividend that goes out to everyone, it's a safety net that everyone could get behind. I guess everyone gets a piece of it. So, anyway, those are some of my thoughts for now. Thanks for listening. Peace.